Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling really one of the most critical moments in flying that go-no-go decision pilots face during takeoff. We're talking about that point defined by a speed called V1.
That's right.
And we're digging into Captain Ashutosh Chopra's The Commercial Pilot's Handbook for this. It gives a, pretty fascinating and honestly quite sobering perspective on this split-second choice.
It really does.
So our mission today is to unpack the complexity, the common mistakes, and maybe some surprising truths about this moment. Okay, let's try and picture this. You're sitting on a plane. Yeah. It's accelerating faster and faster down the runway. You're about to lift off. And there's a specific moment tied to a specific speed where the pilot has to decide instantly, keep going or hit the brakes. Hard.
Seems simple enough on the surface.
Yeah, sounds simple. But what if I told you that sometimes making what feels like the safe choice, stopping, could actually be more dangerous?
That's the paradox, isn't it? And it's important to set the stage here. These events, these rejected takeoffs or RTOs, they're rare. And RTOs near V1 at those really high speeds, they're described as minuscule statistically.
Minuscule. Okay.
But that rarity, it's tricky. It means, as the source says, your guard may be down. So when it does happen, it's potentially even more perilous precisely because it's unexpected. And what's really striking is just how fast everything happens. The handbook states there's basically no time to evaluate the action to be taken right at that decision point.
No time to think it over.
Exactly. It's not about conscious deliberation. It has to be immediate, trained action. Instinct almost, but trained instinct.
Okay, so V1. Let's nail down what that actually is. It's not just a number on the airspeed indicator.
Not quite. It is a speed, but it really represents the latest point in time at which the decision to reject or continue must be made. It implies the reason for that decision. Maybe an engine issue, a warning light. That event has already happened just before V1.
Ah, okay. So the event triggers the potential reject, and V1 is the absolute deadline for making that stop call.
Precisely. It's the last moment you can theoretically initiate a stop and still have enough runway left according to the calculations.
And those calculations, I get the feeling they're based on some ideal condition.
Oh, absolutely. Very ideal. The V1 calculation assumes a few critical things for a successful RTO. 1, the reject is initiated exactly at V1, not a fraction of a second later.
Okay.
2, all the pilot's actions, closing throttles, deploying brakes, spoilers happen without any delay whatsoever.
Zero delay.
3, the transition from acceleration to deceleration is instantaneous.
Which feels unlikely.
And 4, crucially, that max braking effort is available and applied without delay. Maximum braking instantly.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a perfect storm of perfection needed.
It is. It assumes flawless execution under immense pressure.
So, here's the kicker then. If everything has to be perfect for a rejected takeoff right at V1 to work as planned, what happens when it's, not perfect? Which must be often.
And that's where things get really dangerous. Even tiny delays, they have massive consequences. The source mentions that the time between the actual event happening and the aircraft reaching V1 is nominally just 1 second.
1 second.
Just 1 second. And the distance you cover in that single second, it varies depending on the plane and weight, but it's runway you're eating up.
And this leads to what Captain Chopra calls decision error, right? Tell us about that.
Yes, decision error. It's about the delay in recognizing the problem and then acting.
Okay.
And the numbers are stark. For just a 2-second delay in hitting the brakes after V1, just 2 seconds, you can, and I quote, roughly expect your runway excursion speed to be about 30 DLs. You're going off the end at 30 knots.
Whoa. Over 30 miles an hour off the end of the runway?
Yeah.
From a 2-second delay.
Exactly. And that same 2 seconds, it can eat up about 200 meters of your calculated stopping distance.
200 meters. That sounds like a lot.
It's huge. Under high gross weight conditions, that's roughly 30% of the safety margin built in for the stop. Gone in 2 seconds.
30%. Just vanished. That's incredible.
And it gets worse. This initial decision error is compounded by what the book calls training creep.
Training creep?
Yeah. Basically, any little delay or omission in the RTO procedure itself, maybe not getting the speed brakes out immediately or not hitting max braking right away, it just adds to that initial error. The problem snowballs.
Okay, let's break down some of the specific things. You mentioned speed brakes. How critical are they? I thought they were just for drag.
They provide drag, yes, but their main job in an RTO is actually to destroy the lift the wing is generating.
Destroy lift.
Yeah. By killing the lift, they slam the aircraft's full weight onto the wheels. More weight on the wheels means the brakes can bite much harder.
Ah, makes sense. Better grip.
Exactly. If those speed brakes don't come out, the stop distance can increase by maybe 500 feet.
500 feet.
Which, for a heavy jet on what's called a balanced field, where takeoff and stopping distances are optimized, that 500 feet could be nearly a quarter of your calculated stopping distance.
Wow. Okay, so speed brakes are vital, and then there's the braking itself.
Right. The calculation assumes maximum braking, full pedal pressure, right to the floor, or max auto brake setting applied correctly.
And if that doesn't happen, for whatever reason?
The RTO might simply not be successful. You run out of runway.
And then you have the wild cards, the things you can't really plan for.
Exactly. Things like a tire bursting during the RTO. That sort of secondary event, it just cannot possibly be catered for in the standard V1 calculations.
Because it drastically reduces your braking ability.
Absolutely. It reduces deceleration. A typical large jet, what they call a Type A aircraft, might overrun by 300 to 500 feet just because of a tire failure during the stop.
On top of any other delays.
Correct. And you also have potential issues like the auto brake system for the RTO not being armed correctly or failing without the pilots noticing immediately. That can have severe consequences too. So if you tie all this back to the balanced field length idea...
Right, where the runway length is just enough for either scenario.
Yeah. What we do is we essentially, sometimes deliberately, reduce the takeoff acceleration performance slightly. We accept a slightly longer takeoff roll.
Okay.
To ensure that if we do have to stop, there's just enough runway available if, and only if, the RTO is initiated no later than V1 and performed perfectly.
So there's absolutely no margin for initiating the stop after V1.
None whatsoever by design. Yeah. Any later. And you're mathematically guaranteed to run out of pavement.
And this precision, it starts even before the takeoff roll really gets going.
Oh, definitely. There are things that can mess up the performance calculations before you even get near V1.
Like what?
Well, a poor lineup, for instance. Not using the absolute beginning of the runway. That's just wasting stopping distance you might need.
Right, using up your safety margin before you start.
Exactly. Or a delay in setting full takeoff thrust. Incorrect flap settings, maybe you set them for a lighter weight takeoff. Unexpected runway contamination, a patch of water or slush you didn't know about. Even simple things like poor communication or confusion on the flight deck can cause delays, and the V1 call itself is critical.
How so?
The call-out V1 needs to be completed by the time the aircraft reaches V1 speed. It shouldn't start at V1. That tiny difference eats into your reaction time.
Every fraction of a second counts.
Massively. And pilots also need to be constantly monitoring the aircraft's acceleration, looking at the speed trend vector on their display. This helps spot subtle problems, insidious things like an unexpected tailwind picking up, or maybe a partially deflated tire that isn't flat enough to trigger a warning but is still hurting your acceleration.
Things that wouldn't give you a big red light, but are still dangerous.
Precisely. They erode your performance margins silently. You know, all this discussion about the difficulty of stopping, it brings up a really interesting point from the handbook.
Okay.
It notes that in a very large percentage of RTO accidents, not just incidents, but accidents where things went badly wrong, investigations found that full thrust was actually available on both engines.
Wait, so the engines were fine, but they still crashed during the rejected takeoff?
In many cases, yes. Which forces you to ask, could continuing the takeoff, even with the initial problem, have actually been the safer option?
That feels completely counterintuitive. You have a problem, you stop.
Yeah, that's the gut reaction. But consider something like a tire failure before V1.
Okay. Seems like a definite reason to stop.
You'd think so, but Captain Chopra makes a strong point. Quote, a continued takeoff with a tire failure may be safer than a reject.
Safer to keep going with a blown tire. Why?
Because, and this is key, the margins in runway length required for a landing are much higher than those available in an RTO at V1, resulting from poor deceleration due to tire failure.
Ah, okay. So getting airborne, dealing with the problem calmly, and then coming back to land on a potentially much longer runway, or at least with landing margins, that's often less risky than trying a high-speed stop on limited runway with compromised braking.
Exactly. The physics of stopping are just so unforgiving at those speeds and weights, especially if something degrades your braking ability. Getting airborne buys you time and options. And this isn't just a theoretical idea. The book states there are numerous cases where pilots correctly decided to continue the takeoff despite a problem. And later investigations show that if they had rejected the takeoff, the outcome would likely have been catastrophic.
But we never hear about those.
Rarely. Successes, good decisions that avert disaster, they seldom make headlines. We tend to focus on the accidents, which skews our perception of the risks.
That's a really important point about reporting bias. Now, psychologically, you mentioned pilots sometimes equate reason to reject almost exclusively with engine failure.
Yes, that seems to be a potential mental trap. Engine failure is the classic, most trained for RTO scenario. So when something else happens, maybe a strange noise, a configuration warning, something ambiguous, there can be a moment of confusion. A sort of, is this bad enough to stop for?
Hesitation.
And that hesitation is exactly what you don't have time for. Precisely. Which is why rigorous training standards and good visualization techniques are so vital. You need to have mentally rehearsed these scenarios so the correct action is almost automatic for the specific critical failures.
So how do pilots train their mindset for this? Is there a recommended approach?
Captain Chopra suggests a specific mental sequence. Just before hitting the 2GA, swishes the takeoff thrust buttons.
Yeah.
Take literally 1 second, just a quick mental flash. Visualize a potential RTO at V1, just planting the seed, preparing the mind.
Okay, quick pre-visualization.
Then, as you start the roll, maintain a no-go mindset. Up to about 80 knots for a 737 or 100 knots for an A320, these are typical speeds for the airspeed alive and checked callouts.
So default is stop at low speed.
Basically, yes. Low-speed rejects are much less risky. Then, as the speed builds past that point, you slowly transition your mindset towards go. By the time you're about 20 knots below V1, you should be firmly in a go mindset.
Meaning you're planning to fly unless something catastrophic happens.
Exactly. Between that 80-100 knot point and V1, the decision to reject should really only be for the most critical failures listed in the QRH, the Quick Reference Handbook. Engine failure, fire, maybe loss of directional control. Not for minor issues.
So it's a phased approach to the decision based on speed and severity.
Yes. But, at the end of the day, all the training, all the procedures, they culminate in one moment. As the handbook says, in the end, you are the master, the person on the spot. Your decision is final and then binding on you.
It really underscores the immense responsibility on the pilots. So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for us listening?
I think it's a powerful reminder of the incredible pressure and the critical importance of deep training and preparation for these kinds of split-second, high-consequence decisions. Not just in aviation, really.
Right. It applies more broadly.
And specifically for the go-no-go call, it's less about analyzing the situation in that instant, and much more about having the correct response preloaded through training, through understanding the physics, and adopting that carefully calibrated mindset before takeoff even begins.
And realizing that sometimes what looks like the riskier path continuing might actually be the safer one, because the alternative, the high-speed reject, has such razor-thin margins for error.
Precisely. The physics of stopping are brutal.
It really does make you think. The source material ends with that famous line from Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. And maybe that's the thought to leave with you, our listener. Consider the critical decisions you face. Maybe not life or death like this, but high-stakes choices where the obvious answer, the knee-jerk reaction, might not actually be the best one. Where that deeper understanding, that mental preparation is really what makes the difference.